The scariest time of the year might come when the weather turns too cold. But that doesn't mean scary stories weren't meant to be shared on those cold winter nights when the chills sink in and the wind gets up. In fact, winter might just be the perfect season to read horror. Think about it. You're locked up in the house all day, with goodness only knows what or who, forced to stay indoors or die of exposure. There are other, perhaps more obvious similarities between the coldest time of the year and the stories with horror themes. Both will give you goosebumps and make you wish that the sun wouldn't set so soon. The quiet of a snowy night is just about the eeriest thing ever, and whether you've got ghosts or snowdrifts, things could get deadly if your electricity should happen to fail. So as we embark on these snowy horror stories, you can make up your mind if they're completely true, or maybe with a little bit of folklore. According to these writers, they're completely true. There was a young woman named Esther who lived in Letcher County, Kentucky, in 1934. Her boyfriend was a young man named Ezra Jackson, and the couple were very much in love. However, there was an old man who had become obsessed with Esther. He was pestering her all the time and asking her to marry him. She found him repulsive and didn't want anything to do with him, but no matter what she said, she couldn't get him to stop. He was stalking her, and she was scared to death of him. Eventually, she decided that if she had a husband, he might give up and leave her alone, so she married her boyfriend Ezra. After the wedding, as the couple were driving home, the old man suddenly stepped out into the road in front of them. Ezra had to hit his brakes to avoid hitting him. The old man came up to Esther's window and glared in at her. "I'm going to die soon," he growled. "But I'll be back for you, and when I return, you'll go with me." Ezra floored the accelerator and drove off at top speed, but Esther was freaked out and couldn't stop thinking about what the old man had said. A few days later, the old man was found dead in his home. His body was buried in the local cemetery. He had no friends or relatives, and anyone who knew him had been afraid of him, so nobody mourned his passing. A year after his death, on a snowy night in January, Esther was sitting in her living room reading a book when there was a knock at the front door. Her husband and his 2 brothers were in the kitchen. "I'll see who it is," she called to them. The 3 men heard her open the door, but they didn't hear anybody come in. There were no voices, just an eerie silence. After waiting a few minutes, they went to the living room and found the door standing wide open. Esther was nowhere to be seen. When they looked outside, they found the tracks of her bare feet in the snow. The 3 men quickly grabbed their coats and flashlights and set off in search for her. They followed the footprints for 2 miles along the rough, snow-covered country road until they came to a local cemetery. The footprints led through the gate and right up to the old man's grave, where they vanished. While his 2 brothers waited in the cemetery, Ezra went to fetch help. He came back with 7 men from the village. It was midnight and the weather was freezing. Together, under the light of the flashlights and the lanterns, they began to dig up the grave. When they dragged out the coffin and opened it, they were horrified to discover it was empty. Although a thorough search was made, no trace of the young wife or the old man's body was ever found. To this day, the disappearance of Esther Jackson remains an unsolved mystery. The storm lasted so long that they thought they would starve. Finally, when the wind and swirling snow had died away to just a memory, the father, who was a brave warrior, ventured outside. The next storm was already on the horizon, but if food was not found soon, the family would starve. Keeping his knife and spear close, he ventured out upon the most frequently used game trail, watching intently for some sign in the newly fallen snow of an animal footprints or movement of any kind. The forest lay deep and oddly silent under its gleaming coating of ice and snow. Every creature of sense lay deep within its burrow and slept. Still, the warrior hunting, knowing how desperate his family had become. As he moved through the eerie stillness, broken only by the soft caress of the wind, he heard a strange hissing noise. It came from everywhere and nowhere at once. The warrior stopped, his heart pounding. That was when he saw the blood-soaked footprints appearing on the path in front of him. He gripped his knife tightly, knowing that somewhere, watching him, was a Wendigo. He had learned about the Wendigo at his father's knee. It was a large creature as tall as a tree, with a limpless mouth and jagged teeth. Its breath was a strange hiss, its footprints full of blood, and it ate any man, any woman, or child who ventured into its territory. And those were the lucky ones. Sometimes the Wendigo chooses to possess a person instead, and then the luckless individual becomes a Wendigo himself, hunting down those he had once loved and feasting upon their flesh. The warrior knew he would just have one chance to prevail over the Wendigo. After that, he would die, or the thought was too terrible to complete. Slowly he backed away from the bloody footprints, listening to the hissing sound. Was it stronger in one direction? He gripped his spear in one hand, knife in the other. Then the snowbank to his left erupted as a creature as tall as a tree leapt out at him. He drove to one side, rolling into the snow so that his clothing was covered and he became hard to see in the gray twilight of the approaching storm. The Wendigo whirled its massive frame, and the warrior threw the spear. It struck the creature's chest, but the Wendigo just shook it off as if it was a toy. The warrior crouched behind a small tree as the creature searched the torn-up snow for a trace of him. Perhaps one more chance. The Wendigo loomed over his hiding place, its sharp eyes seeing the outline of him against the tree. It bent down, long arms reaching. The warrior leapt forward as if it was embraced the creature and thrust his knife into his formless black eye. The Wendigo howled in pain as the blade of the knife sliced into its brain cavity. It tried to pull him off its chest, but the warrior clung to the creature, stabbing it again and again in the eye and the head. The Wendigo collapsed to the ground, bleeding profusely, almost crushing the warrior beneath its bulk. It pulled himself loose and stared at the creature, which blended in with its white surroundings so well that he would have not seen it, save for the blood pouring from its eye and ear and scalp. Then the outline of the creature grew misty, and it vanished, leaving only a pool of blood to indicate where it had fallen. Shaken, the warrior, heart pounding with fear and fatigue, turned for home. He was weakened by lack of food, but knew that the storm would break soon, and he would die if he did not seek shelter. At the edge of the wood, he found himself face to face with a red fox. It was a fat old creature, its muzzle lined with gray. The creature stood still, as if it had been brought to him, as a reward for killing the Wendigo. With a prayer of thanksgiving, the warrior killed the fox and took it home to his starving family. The meat lasted for many days, until the final storm had blown itself out, and the warrior could safely hunt once more. Long ago, there was a number of lonely lumberjacks working at the center of a very large forest. They cut down mammoth trees and watched them crash into the thick snow in exactly the place where they said the trees would land. They would cut up the trees and haul them to and fro. They worked hard, very hard indeed, but they were lonely for the women that they had left behind. On New Year's Day, it snowed so hard, no work could be done. The men huddled in their camp and spoke longingly of their home. They passed around the rum and drank toasts to the New Year. But finally, Baptise said what they were all thinking. "I wish to go home today and see my girl." There were murmurs of agreement, but Jean replied, How can we go home today? There is more than 2 meters of snow on the road, and more snow is falling." "Who said we were walking out of here?" asked Baptise. "I'm going to paddle out in my canoe." Now the men all knew that Baptiste had a canoe with paddles out back of the camp. Baptiste had made a pact with the devil. If the devil would make the canoe fly wherever Baptiste wished, the lumberjacks would not say mass for an entire year. However, if Baptiste did not return the canoe before the dawn of the day after he used it, the devil could keep his soul. While Baptiste and his companions would not say the name of God or fly over a church or touch any crosses, or the canoe would crash. Many of the men refused to participate in Baptiste's New Year's scheme, but he managed to find 7 companions to fly with him in the canoe back to their hometown to visit their women. Baptiste and his friends got into the canoe, and Baptiste said the magic words, "Acubris, Acubras, Acubram." When Baptiste was done binding himself to the devil, the canoe rose into the air, and the men began to paddle their way through the sky to their home. Their womenfolk were so glad to see them. They celebrated long into the night, drinking and dancing. It was close to dawn when the men realized they had to return the canoe to the lumber camp by dawn or forfeit their souls. They searched for Baptiste and found him drunk as a skunk, lying under a table at the inn. They bundled him up into the canoe, spoke the magic words, and paddled away. Knowing that Baptiste would start swearing if they woke him, one of the men tied him up and gagged him so he would not speak the name of God at an inopportune moment and crashed the canoe. When Baptiste awoke, he sat up, struggling with the ropes that bound him. He managed to loosen the gag and shout, "Mon Dieu, why have you tied me up?" At the name of God, the canoe took a nosedive, plunging towards the ground. It hit the top of a large pine tree, and all the men tumbled out and fell down into the darkness just before dawn. They were never seen again. Yeah, I remember what it was like before the railroad came through these parts. I used to earn my living by carting supplies from town to town on horse-drawn wagons. Not easy work, no sir, especially in winter. One cold January day, I was traveling with my buddy Tab when it began to snow. Geez, it was cold. We needed to find shelter and quick, and I was delighted when I spotted an abandoned house. We thought we were real lucky finding such a good shelter. As we unhitched the horses, a fellow stopped by to talk to us, claiming that he was the owner of the property. He told us we were welcome to stay, but the house was haunted. The owner said no one had ever stayed in that house and had made it out alive. That was good enough for me. I hitched old Bessie back up to the wagon and moved up the road to the stand of trees that offered some shelter from the snow. Tab said he wasn't afraid of no ghosts, and he didn't plan on perishing in the snow. I wasn't about to risk my own neck in a haunted house. I built a fire as best I could and waited through the long night, wondering a couple of times if Tab wasn't the smart one. Well, just about dawn, I gave up trying to sleep. I went back down to the road to see how Tab had fared for the night. I peeked through the windows on the first floor. I saw Tab snoozing peacefully in a big bed. He looked warm and happy. Then I saw movement on the ceiling. I looked up, and there was a large man dressed all in white, floating flat against the ceiling. The man was right over Tab, looking down on him. "Tab!" I hissed, tapping at the window. "Tab, get out of there, you fool!" Tab awoke, but instead of looking toward the window, he looked straight up and saw the man on the ceiling. Tab gave an awful yell, but before he could move out of the bed, the man fell and landed right on top of him. Now, Tab was a big, strong fellow, but the ghost was powerful. They wrestled back and forth on the bed, I gave a shout and smashed the glass in the window, shouting, "Hold him, Tab, hold him!" Just then the ghost flung himself and Tab right at me, knocking me back out the window and into the snow. The ghost levitated himself and Tab onto the roof of the front porch. I kept shouting, "Hold him, Tab, hold him!" The ghost and Tab were wrestling frantically on the porch roof. The ghost gave a mighty leap and threw Tab onto the roof of the house. "Hold him, Tab," I shouted. "Hold him!" Then the ghost lifted Tab right into the air. I got him," Tab cried. "But he got me too." They were floating a few feet off the roof, still grappling with each other, and then the ghost carried Tab straight up into the air, and they vanished. I never saw Tab again. In 1914, the Newfoundland sailed up to the ice with a crew of 250 men. On March 30th, 77 men went out on the ice to kill seals. A mighty storm came up while the men were out. That lasted 2 days, and the men could not make it back to the ship. When the storm ceased, other ships came and helped the crew of the Newfoundland search for the missing men. 72 were found dead, and 5 were missing and presumed drowned. The ship sailed home in sorrow and did not go to the ice at all the next year. She was considered to be unlucky. To break the curse, the ship was rebuilt and changed so that she would drown no more men. Her new name was the San Blandford, and she was sent to the ice 2 years after the terrible storm. On the 30th day of March, she met up with another ship called the Terra Nova. As dusk fell, a fog rolled in, and the crew of the San Blandford heard the Terra Nova blowing her whistle. This was a signal that she still had men out on the ice. As was customary, the crew of the San Blandford started blowing their whistle, and those above deck could hear voices calling out from the ice, and presumed they belonged to sailors from the Terra Nova. The 2 ships kept up their signals until 10 p.m., when the voices ceased, and all were presumed safely aboard ship. The next morning, a sailor from the San Blandford boarded the Terra Nova to conduct some business. The captain of the ship immediately asked the sailor what time the members of the San Blandford crew had gotten aboard the previous night. The sailor was puzzled. "We didn't have anyone out on the ice, sir," he told the captain. But the captain and his crew swore they had seen several men board the San Blandford shortly before 10 p.m. When the sailor returned to the San Blandford, he reported the incident to his captain. The captain took him quietly aside and told him that the report was true. A few members of the night crew had seen 5 men climb aboard the San Blandford shortly before 10 p.m. The men were wearing tattered clothing and looked as if they had been ripped and worn out by the waves of the sea, and the crew could see right through their shining bodies. One of the sailors on duty that evening had been on the Newfoundland when she lost the 77 men 2 years ago that very night. He had recognized the faces of the ghosts as those belonging to the 5 men who were presumed drowned. Their spirits had finally returned to the ship from which they had been lost, and could now rest in peace. This happened when I was 9 years old, but I still remember it as though it happened yesterday. Pardon the overused cliche. It was the middle of January, and we were having the worst snowstorm recorded where I lived. Needless to say, all of the schools in the district were closed. Around noon, I went out to celebrate the rare snow day and revel in the snow with the kids who lived on my block. We all trekked down to the nearby playground. I suppose it was because there was more virgin snow there. At one point, the group decided to try to build an igloo, but I quickly lost interest as it was not holding together, and I was tired of being bossed around, so I separated from the group to a fresh patch of snow several yards away. I was going to make a snowman. I had just finished the first ball, and I was already bored and thinking about rejoining the group. When I looked at my snowman again, I saw that there was an older boy standing near it, with a grin on his face, I noticed that there was something a little strange about him. His clothing seemed old-fashioned and somewhat ragged, but I didn't mention anything. In fact, we never really said a word to each other. But by the end of the afternoon, we had finished our snowman. I took off my hat and put it on the snowman's head, and the boy unwound the thick woolen scarf from around his neck to place it around the snowman's. When he finished, he smiled at me, bent to kiss my cheek. I remember that his lips were cold, but that didn't seem weird to me at first. After all, we had just spent all afternoon playing in the snow. He gave a little wave and turned around to walk away. One of my friends called my name. I turned to look. They had all given up on their igloo and were heading back home. I followed and didn't give another thought to the strange boy until later. Over hot chocolate, one of my friends commented on how quickly I managed to build the snowman. I laughed and told her that it wasn't that hard. I had help. A strange, uncomfortable silence fell over the group, and one of the other girls said that they hadn't seen me with anyone. I rolled my eyes, figuring they formed some sort of collective pact to freak me out or something, as a way to get back at me. The next day, I went back to the park, where we'd been playing. Most of the area was covered in footprints, and evidence of my friend's attempts at the igloo. But as I approached my snowman, the footprints thinned out. I couldn't believe my eyes. There were no footprints whatsoever there. Not mine, and not the boys'. The snowman stood alone, surrounded by white snow, untouched, except for the tracks where we'd been building the snowball bases. Weird. I stood there for a moment, looking around, in case the boy was standing nearby. No one was around. The snowman still wore my hat. I went over to it and retrieved it. After a moment's thought, I went back and unwrapped the scarf from around the snowman's neck to place it around my own. I still have that scarf, and to this day, I wear it during the winter or whenever I'm feeling lonely. Alright, my lovely lilies, thank you so much for watching the new video. If you can, hit that subscribe and like button, comment below and tell me your thoughts. Also, don't forget to tap the little notification bell so you're always in the know on this channel. As well, guys, you can always find me on Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, and always you can hit me up in my emails. Feel free to send me your stories, whether they're fiction or totally true. I'm always up for some great stories. And oh, by the way, until next time, sweet dreams.